Welcome to the In-Betwixt and In-Between. This is Leadership Limbo, a podcast aimed at helping middle managers and their supervisors embrace the discomfort and power of leading themselves and others in the midst of it all. We blend real insight with practical tools to help you lead with self-awareness, purpose, and influence, wherever you are on your leadership journey. I'm Josh Hugo, joined today by my good friend, co-host, John Clark. John, good morning.
Hello. I just thought about this as you were reading there. So this is, because I never like to do the big ones, you just do random episodes. I think this is episode 40 for us.
Whoa. Ding,
yeah.
ding, ding,
So I
ding,
think if I'm right, and I could be wrong, but we did 19 in season 1, and then this will be 21 in season 2. And I know we did some replays there, but I think we're up at 40. So
40.
We're about to approach past our ages.
I know.
Past
I
our
was
ages.
just thinking the same thing.
I mean, it's past my age because I'm like 33, but your age. So, but yeah, that's exciting. So I know we've got this and maybe one other episode for this season before taking a little bit of a break. So anyway, that's pretty cool. I'm
It is pretty cool.
having a lot of fun and thankful for folks that keep listening to us and keep coming back, and hopefully we can continue to grow it. And I don't know, it's exciting. So I thought I was just thinking about that. So good.
Yeah.
Congrats to you.
Yeah. And congratulations to you and to our listeners for sticking with us.
Yep.
Yeah. 40 episodes. It's about twice the number of podcasts as the average podcast ever gets to. I think
That's
is
right.
like below 20, in fact.
Wow.
And so we're just kind of staying consistent, trying to get it out into the wild. And so thank you, our listeners, for being part of this journey with us. Really excited. We also got some new music for you. It's
Keep having to get your music.
seconds. I've had that song in my head just because you might be wondering why have we changed our music 3 times. We'll just very briefly, we thought it was time to refresh like 2 months ago. So we added some new tracks this past spring. And then when we went to edit the most recent podcast, we realized that they took the entire previous musical library down. And so our music that we had just put on in March is no longer available. So I do kind of like the new song. I don't know, John, what do you think?
It's fine. If you like it, this is,
But most important, it's not about what we like. It's it's about what you all like. So if you like the new song, great. And if you don't, you can let us know as well. We're certainly open to new music every week.
Our branding isn't like consistency. It shouldn't even be, certain. You could just change it so there's a new song each time, and that in and of itself would be a brand. Ours is just going to be really sporadic. We might play it for 3 months and then switch for a couple weeks and then go back and do new music.
You can edge your seats.
Yeah.
We had two 5-star ratings on the car ride to school today, though. Both of my kids approved of the musical intro. So
nice. That's great.
I'm working with 100% approval rate currently.
Your boys are listening to Leadership Limbo? That's great. Good for them.
First 5 minutes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we kind of got into their eyes glazed over.
Yeah.
But your eyes don't glaze over, nor do your ears. So thank you for joining. Big pitch last week to subscribe and share. I hope you did. And if you haven't, it's something you can still do this week. So thank you for engaging, commenting, giving us 5-star review, 4-star review. If it's, pretty good, don't go lower than that without giving us a call, because
let us know.
if you're just about ready to drop
no more anonymous feedback. No more anonymous feedback. Just tell us
if you're going to give us 1 star, we will be grateful for the risk you took if you include your name. But if you don't include your name, get that garbage out of here. So here we are. We're going to spend today doing a little reflection at the end of our 2nd season. We actually will have this episode plus 1 more. We have a guest coming on in a week, and looking forward to closing out with Anne. But before we publish the final episode of season 2, we wanted to spend a little bit of time kind of open-ended with reflections on what we've learned in the past 2 seasons of Leadership Limbo in bringing topics to each of you and reflecting in the work of discussing leadership and bringing, hopefully, tools and ideas, reflections, experiences that can help each of you think about how you show up as a leader. So, you ready to do this, John?
Yeah, I love it. So a little bit of a summary here, maybe get people to go back to some old episodes of ours, and like all learning, it's cumulative, right? So how have we taken all of these ideas and put them into some good thoughts? So yeah, Josh, lead the way, my friend.
Yeah, great. And I think part of starting this is that, we set out with a vision over a year or almost a year ago now, but we didn't know where the journey would take us and where it
Yeah.
has taken us and where it will take us. And so these are authentic reflections. I think some of these things we've put into words since we've done the podcast and perhaps we knew before. And some of it, frankly, is things I've learned in the past year of doing this. So I think one of the biggest reflections I've had is that when it comes to the development of leaders in leadership development programs, books, ideas, podcasts, is that there's just a lot of misleading and misunderstood guidance out there. There's no shortage of it. Obviously,
Mhm.
we're contributing to the ecosystem of leadership learning as well. And what I've learned in our discussions is there's often more nuance, more ambiguity, more liminal space, more limbo space in a lot of what is out there. And in the busyness and thinking back to my own time in organizational leadership, there's so much busyness, so much that you're doing that you grab onto a theme and kind of just start running with it, even if you don't fully understand it. And I think one of the learnings I've had in co-hosting this show is that if you stop and slow down a little bit and start to investigate the term, the idea, the concept, and reflect on it with a little bit more intentionality, you can start to unwrap some of the ways that I think I have and other leaders have misused or
Yeah.
misunderstood terms that ends up impacting your team in negative ways. And so that's kind of where I wanted to start, John. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think sometimes maybe you've been in leadership for a bit or you think you have unlocked the code of leadership, a lot of things appear evident to you about how one should lead or what that looks like. Or well, if we just apply this term as you put it, that we find I think there's two problems with that. One, the person sitting across from you that you're teaching to be a leader or that is new to leadership or maybe is advanced, it's not as evident to them, or they struggle with it in different ways, or they don't understand it the same way as you. Second, frankly, you might misunderstand it and you might need to adjust. And so I think sometimes leadership is one of those spaces where it's not chemistry formulas, right? It's not trying to put a rocket around the moon. And so a lot of it feels like, well, these are easy concepts, but it
Mm.
really has to do with context in the moment. And I think you're right. That deep reflection and understanding is key, which I think leads into a big theme we talked about several episodes, but it's always surfaced is around the idea of how we navigate ambiguity.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, we like a good framework. We like ways that help you and tools and templates that help you to ease the work of leadership and develop your teams. But if you're not doing those with a sense of and throughout this, I'm going to be managing challenge, I'm going to be managing uncertainty, I'm going to be managing the uncertainty for others, and you're not constantly in that battle of trying to navigate it and drive, then I think your leadership is going to be impaired. And so
Right.
I think Dr. Griffin, I think a lot of our folks talked about this, but I do think Dr. Griffin, going back to him, and we talked about his book in the midst of it all about leading through the pandemic and what that meant for school leaders.
Mm.
This idea of like daring to be wrong, to make tough decisions at tough times, even if there's a chance it won't work out. You never do anything that's dangerous or foolish, but you have to kind of go for it at times, and your team will follow you if your heart's in the right place. And so, yeah, I think you're right. It's more important that we think about the challenging things or the uncertain things, and we're willing to lead through those. And that as a leader, we know that's going to happen versus
Mm.
assuming we can get into a place where we can be certain as a leader and just tell people how to think or how to act.
Yeah, and I think that theme's going to come up here in the difference between keeping responsibility where it belongs and
Yeah.
telling others how to think and act is rarely your responsibility. It could be
Yeah.
related to it, but we often over-index on how often we think that way. So yeah, it really is kind of how we started off. This is the ambiguity, like the in between, the in
Mhm.
betwixt, in between of leadership, and I think Uh, it's no quick fix. I think that's a piece here too, is there are some quick strategies. We really do try to present information that can help you the next day or even that same day as you've listened to it. But a lot of what we want you to be doing as a listener is we want for ourselves is to get you to think.
Mm.
Just to get you to think, because sometimes we're just so quick to plug and play that we're running without actually paying attention. So getting you to think is an outcome of kind of what I've reflected on from the past 40 episodes,
Yeah.
which ties nicely to another kind of extension of what we've just talked about. One of the more powerful conversations that I've had, not just on this podcast, but in the last year, that's really shaped a lot of my thinking was with Andrew Robinson when he came on to talk about the difference between the old concept of management, and he traced the etymology of that and then spoke about development derived from de-envelopment, which is the removal of layers. And underneath it, I think John pointed out a really powerful insight as well, which was I think a lot of leaders who are most effective believe in the capacity of others. And leaders and managers who struggle often don't share that same belief in the
Hmm.
capacity of others. And the idea, if there's nothing else that you've taken out of listening to the show this long, has been the best managers and the best leaders are both responsible for developing others. And the importance of development rests on a lot of different skills and different practices, but fundamental is the belief that another person has the capacity to be responsible for their own growth. And when you do think that way and you set up structures to be able to reinforce that, and you carry this mindset of belief in others into your work, you're much more unlikely to unlock the full capacity, the full
Yeah.
power of other people.
Hmm.
John, what do you think when it comes to
No, I
this
mean,
develop?
the number of times we come back through different guests and just in ours that this is a development game. This is a growth
Mhm,
game. And I do, and there are a lot of people that have a hard time with that. And I think it comes through several reasons. One, it's just a mindset you have to develop about your role in developing others. Two, it's hard sometimes. It is hard to find where does that fit in the busyness of my role and the other responsibilities I have. And yet, I do think if organizations helped their managers, or if managers themselves help themselves to highly index on how am I developing individuals, how am I developing my team, we would see a lot better outcomes in our places of work, right?
mhm,
To your point about development, about leaders as developers and managers as developers, this is a very poorly based metaphor, but I do wonder if like leaders are helping to train and develop the eyes of folks, like the brains of them, like where are we going? Not the brains necessarily, but just like where are we going? Like what's possible? What do we believe we can get done? And the managers are at some level training the hands. Like what do we do? Like how do we do it
mm,
well? How do
mhm,
we, and it's not a perfect metaphor, but I think both of those are important. Managers is the people that are helping with the functioning and the cohesion and the day-to-day work. Leadership more about where are we going? And it's not just about my vision of where we're going, but can I bring you all along with me? And can we see where
yeah,
this is going? So that's
mhm,
an interesting thing to talk about too, is this difference between management and leadership and how both of those play a role in development as well. I think that's something we started our first episode off with
yeah,
is there's power in both of these versus trying to cast leadership and management against each other. I
right,
think is really interesting. So no,
yeah,
some great stuff. Brandy Chin, I think also did a great job with this about development, but in the context of how do you frame accountability for folks and not just accountability of like do it my way, but help them to see the values behind what you're doing, the purpose, and then lead them in the skills they need to do it well. So, yeah, development is a key part of everything we've talked about, I feel like.
yeah. I think very simply put, we can't constantly be just telling others what to do. And
Yes.
I catch myself doing that all the time in a lot of spaces in life. Either children, I think back to leading teams and saying, this is what we're doing. Or on the flip side, like pulling back so far from telling others what to do that I'm kind of softening what is needed without asking it as a question too, and or asking it artificially. And so I think that the posture of our interior, the way that we think about responding to pressure in these emotional systems in which we
Yeah.
operate was another theme that has really come up. And we've talked through a number of different books. John and I have often come back to A Failure of Nerve, which is a book that I think I would encourage people to read. And I don't know where you stand on that, John, but I think it's led to some good mutual discussions here. And that brings up a real through line across a lot of our podcasts too, which is this idea of maturely functioning, or we sometimes the theoretical term would be self-differentiation.
Hmm.
How do you, as a manager, as a leader, as a supervisor, amidst an emotional system, which is simply the nature of being in relational systems across people, right? So our families, of course, are uh, kind of the original source of how we learn to respond to pressure in a system. But in leadership itself, we're in community with other people and we're working across challenging dynamics oftentimes. So, what does it mean to be a maturely functioning leader where yourself can still sit amidst the pressure without leaving it, without distancing, without fusing into what everyone else wants you to do? And frankly, I was actually talking about this past week with my spiritual director. The the word that comes to mind with a lot of this idea of mature functioning and self differentiation is very countercultural.
Yeah.
We've brought up a few of these competing these themes. The word's not competing, but that sometimes are easily assumed to mean one thing, but actually mean something else. And so we had talked about somewhat recently, John, what was the theme that we were bringing up that we really dove into over those three parts like a month ago?
Psychological safety.
Yeah, psychological safety.
Yep.
Thank you. Yeah, psychological safety was something that we kind of tackled because it often is misunderstood to the point in which we're not functioning in a mature way as we try to build this within our team. And I think that challenging conventions, challenging ideas that feel good, but maybe don't ultimately keep responsibility in the places that's needed, which is part of developing others, is believing that they have a primary role in developing, can lead to some pretty dysfunctional behaviors in a workplace. And
Yeah.
so this has a lot of notes in it, lots of thoughts here, John, but I want to flip it to you before I keep going.
Yeah, no, this is still a fascinating one for me, and you obviously introduced it to me, and I've read it and did a actually did a deep dive with my AI the other week on like this concept of self differentiation, like related to characters and stories I've read. So believe it or not,
Interesting. Okay.
because self differentiation, when we talk about our mature functioning, the counter to that is sometimes people that interpret that as cold or aloof or indifferent, or
Selfish.
you're so outside of the emotional system that you actually selfish. You don't actually understand the reality of others. And sometimes people see that as, okay, I'm just taking a very neutral stance on it. I think sometimes it could probably be confused for, well, I sit outside the system and so I make my own rules, right? Now, so that's a challenging thing to think about it. How do you self differentiate yourself without still connecting yourself to the community that you serve and that you help and the people that you're that work for you? I don't want to get too much into Game of Thrones, but this made me think about like Bran, who becomes the three-eyed raven, becomes this like really, he becomes the leader, but he's so indifferent, he's so unpassionate, he is so robotic that nobody can relate to him, but he just knows stuff, right? The more interesting characters in that regard are going to be your Tyrion Lannister, your Jaime Lannister, your Jon Snow, who become these leaders of sorts, but have to keep challenging themselves and overcoming what others want at times to make the right tough decision, even if it gets them killed, even if it gets them imprisoned, even if it makes them hard. So I don't want to get too much into that, but that's a great case study of
Mm,
the idea of what the differentiated leader is actually still emotional and
yes.
still cares, but they're able to take themselves out of it to make the right decision regardless of what like the emotions of others are saying or the
Yes.
system calls for it. So that's the bigger question, is how do you reflect on not how do I separate myself from the system in my eyes? And again, I'm still on a journey of understanding that, which is I think what makes this concept so unique and wonderful. But just like how do I live in that and still put myself outside of it enough to make the decision that I know is right for the organization, for the people, even if sometimes they can't see it.
Yeah.
And that includes input from others. That includes other contexts. It's not just what lives in your brain, but that's tough sometimes because the easy thing is just to be like, well, I guess we'll do this thing because others want it. And I don't want to,
Right.
I don't want to rock the boat too much.
Right.
And
It's that
so,
separation of
yeah,
thinking and feeling. It doesn't mean that you don't feel. It just means that you know that you are feeling and that you can still think about it. And a
yeah,
lot of the time where leaders go astray is that they're operating from an emotional reaction without actually pausing long enough to think about what the implications of
right.
that would be. And I think that that separation of being able to observe your feelings, not to say feelings are bad or feelings don't have a
No,
space here or that there's
that's key.
reactions to really challenging things that will stir up an emotional response, is that the very best leaders can see it
Yes.
and they can have a healthy relationship to that emotion. And
Yeah.
they know themselves to say, ooh, when I'm feeling sad, what I like to do is please everyone else. Well, that's a reaction to sadness. That's not a really thinking response to it. It's more of a reaction response to it. So how do I say, okay, I know my tendency is when things are really stressful and bad things have happened, what I really want to do is like lay off my tough feedback to people because I just know they're already having a tough time. That's probably not the most principled approach to your leadership that you would do when things were going well, which is I bring tough feedback to people to help them grow, regardless of the circumstances. You have to catch that gap happening inside of yourself to say, but I know when things get hard, I back off. I can't do that. That's me
Right.
fusing into the system. That's me over kind of, I'll use this word again, but over indexing on the emotional response to the situation. That's important to acknowledge it exists, but it's really critical to still be able to think through it.
Yeah. And this just, this goes back to conversations with Michael Sykes, who was our first guest back in season 1. If it's been a
Mm,
while since people have listened to that, I would listen to that. And Susie Lance, I think both just did a really, I mean, just a great job of talking about the idea of like, how do we know ourselves and understand ourselves as leaders? Susie talked about basically you have to like unsurface those traumas, big or small, from
mm,
your life to
mhm.
know how do I deal with those and how have I overcome those to get me where I am. And that introspection, that level of awareness, I think to your point, Josh, isn't the thing that helps to hide you from emotion or keep emotions at bay. Actually, I think that's harmful, but it's the thing that allows you to say, how am I showing up right now? And we talked about this in our episode about how do you lead when the world is hard, you know?
Mm,
And some of
mhm.
the first step often is knowing where do I sit right now and how am I handling this? And how can I both be present in that, but also utilize it, catalyze it in such a way that it's not going to lead to toxic situations in the way I'm leading, right? Whether that's over functioning, under functioning, over accommodating for others.
Right.
So I think that's part of it. And it's a little bit of a segue into this part, but I actually think it works, especially in light of what we heard from Dan Beatty last week, which is this idea has kept surfacing regardless of industry, whether it's construction or, management consultants or education leaders or anything, Raytheon, with David Bollins, is that technical expertise obviously is important. It is a very small piece of the pie when it comes to leading and managing others. And that's regardless
Mhm.
of industry. Like you heard Dan talk about this in construction, which, is often about reading the blueprints right, building things correctly, code, safety. It has a lot of technical elements to it. And Dan has said, but first and foremost, this is a people business. It's about how do you build those
Right.
relationships that get people inspired by what you're building for them or doing for them, or get them to want to work as a team together to build things that they can't build by themselves, right? And I
Right.
love the way he put it. There's actually a clip out last week that I would encourage people to see about. There's IQ, obviously there's the intellectual quotient, but he talks about the most important. But then beyond that, that's really important is the personal quotient. How do I understand myself? How I'm showing up? How I'm presenting myself to others, and is that
Mhm.
inspiring to them? And then the emotional quotient, which is how do I lead others? How do I understand them? And so that is a much bigger part of the pie, regardless of industry. And if you're not willing to lean into those things, I think your time as a leader is going to be short lived. It doesn't mean everyone's approach to EQ and personal quotient has to look the same. But if you're not considering it because you think everything is just about directiveness and intelligence, I think you're going to have a hard time leading really effective teams, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's such an important theme. And that's really why I started my own business is that there's just a lot of experiences personally in being that person and then being the leader of people who've moved into roles because they were excellent doers to talking to leaders in other businesses who are struggling with the very same situation, having really talented IQ folks in leadership roles. And that's really the beauty of that three-part EQ, PQ, IQ model is that you can start to say, like, really, your focus as a leader needs to be on the EQ and the PQ side of the table. And another way of putting it that I've been doing some thinking on recently that has come up across our conversations in different ways is the idea of we are human beings, not human doings.
Mhm.
And the idea of being as opposed to doing is not only just for managers and leaders. I think as people in general, we can get very much stuck in the attainment trap, and we can start to just get to what have I accomplished lately? What have you done for me lately? What have you done recently? And it would be really interesting to kind of think about the paradigm for what would it sound like to say, what have you been recently? How have you been recently? How is your being going for you right now? And the shift that is involved there for leaders comes back to the topics we brought up a few months ago around presence, and that one of the most important things you can do, especially if you're trying to operate as a developer, is to be really present to that other person, to focus on how you are
Yeah,
being
that was a
in
big
that,
one.
not just what you are doing. Did you assign a big checklist of things for them to do? Okay, that might be helpful, especially if somebody's really off task. But at the same time, if you can sit in a conversation with another person as a manager and be really focused on your own presence and the curiosity in which you can bring to that other person, in which it may spark for them questions they haven't asked you as their supervisor, that allows you to have a meaningful dialogue. It might spark for them more time to think about what it is that they need, right? A lot of the challenges that leaders and managers face is that the overall paradigm organizationally that we've grown up with from our schooling all the way to the workplace is that the positional authority of supervisors, managers, leaders implies this sort of deferential sort of dynamic. And for you to break through that dynamic where you, as the person with some positional authority over another person, is already kind of the resting assumption, right? Well, I'm here. The boss tells me what to do, and I do it. Is creating an unhealthy dynamic out of the gate. And there's a good chance that as a leader, the people who are sitting across from you at the table just kind of expect that. So you're not just like listening to our podcast thinking about these theoretical ideas of, ooh, it would be really good to not overfunction for other people. It would be really good to develop other people. It would be really good to be present for other people. It starts to become even more challenging when you realize the person sitting across from you also has a say in all of this. And a lot of
Yeah.
people might sit there and say, "Well, what do you mean I need to think about it? You just tell me what to do, boss. What do you mean you're going to develop me? I just need to know what my job is. Give me my criteria for success and let me walk out of here. I don't really have to think. I just need to do." And so the presence that you bring into that space, that non-reactive presence, is such a critical part of flipping the paradigm that we often experience across multiple different spaces in our lives.
Yeah. I have two things to say to that, and I want to get to your last point, and then I'm going to go back to something you said earlier. I think there always going to be some sort of like deferential structure. Like I don't see that changing. Like so, I actually don't have a problem with the idea that there are people we defer to because they have expertise, they have knowledge, they have experience that I don't have, and I think we should often raise those people to levels of importance. Like I'm not totally anti-hierarchy. I will say
Right.
I don't believe, like for example, King Arthur's Round Table, beautiful concept, but where did everyone orient themselves towards? They oriented themselves towards the king. Like my eyes are still on him. Like he was
Mhm.
still the leader of that group of knights. But what the difference is in that situation is, I think as a leader, you need to understand that people are probably going to be deferential to you, or they're going to hold you different weight to what you say or how you act. And to Josh's point, how you invite them in is more on you than what you just expect them to do. Like if you say,
Yeah.
well, I just wish these people would tell me things, or back to our point of, I wish people just had more ownership. You have to release that to them. You have to invite them into that. You have to invite them into a space where they feel safe giving you feedback and they feel safe caring for you, right? I'm sorry, feel safe telling you things enough to show you that they care for you. Otherwise, they're going to do things out of fear or where we're naturally positioned to think about leaders, which is hands
Yeah.
off until we're actually invited in. And so that's one. I also loved your point, Josh, about the human, as you're talking about human being and human doing, it reminded me of, and I haven't read it, but I read parts of it or seen parts of it, but the Pope's encyclical about called Magnificat Humanitas, which is about
Okay.
AI. One of the coolest things he said in it is not about AI, but it relates to it. And I want us to think about this as leaders. I know some of this is grounded in a religious element, but I think it applies whether you're agnostic or atheist or religious or anything, that he talks about humans get their dignity just out of being people, not out of what they produce. And if you start with that concept of the people you lead, I promise you, by giving them the dignity they deserve just for being folks that are with you and alongside you, they will do a lot more. Actually, like that's the counter to that is when we show people our belief in them and we extend dignity to them just for who they are. And as leaders, when we extend to people like our care for them just because they exist, they're gonna want to be better. They're gonna want to do more. They're gonna be inspired by that. And I thought that was a really
Mm,
profound thing. Is not everything is just some zero sum game of like what can I get out of people. It should be about I'm just starting with a place of care for you and love and understanding your dignity. And now I'd like to work on some things together. Right.
yeah,
And I think that's powerful. So
it's beautiful.
I
And
think we have one more here, Josh, that
yeah, it's
we're
a
gonna
nice
talk about here.
extension to, I mean, I think that's a really great segue to just a closing reflection on 2 seasons in for me is there's just a lot of really great people out
Yeah.
there who want to show up well for other people. Whether they're coaches, they're consultants, they're leaders in an organization, they're individual contributors who do care for the other people on their team without an official title. I just think there's a lot of people who know how important it is to build the kind of culture that leaves people feeling fulfilled. I don't think that we've talked to anyone, and I think we would, of course, filter out folks who don't care about those same kind of values that we care about on this podcast. But I think the fact is, as I see it, most people out there really want what's good for others.
Yeah,
And
totally.
the people we've invited on our show are great examples of that. The people who have inspired us and have led to our own learnings, whether it be through their writings, through their speaking, through their model, have really inspired us. And all that being said, caring, a huge piece of it. Like you mentioned that word a few minutes ago, and I think that caring is foundational to being an effective manager and leader. And being skillful and intentional is also required. Is that simply caring for others can lead you into a trap of ineffective functioning with your team. And so I think that's kind of my relatively closing thought here is that there's great people out there, and because you care and because you have heart, it is likely to make you a really effective manager or a really effective leader. And caring alone is insufficient in developing the kind of impact that you do want. And so that is where I think we are going to continue to be committed to you as our listeners is that we're not just here to convince you to care. I think the only reason you'd be listening to this podcast is because you care. What we are here to do is to continue to try to bring ways for you to think more clearly and develop the skills needed to be a more effective leader. And I can speak for my own self that that is my commitment to each of you. And I'm really looking forward to seeing where this podcast continues to go moving forward. John,
Yeah.
I'll flip it back to you.
Yeah, and I think I just 2 points here. Again, the one, Dan brought this up last week, and Josh, you've introduced it to us. You'll have to help me with the name of the framework, but the liberation model that I know you get from
Right. The
Triumph.
support and challenge, the
It's
support
about
challenge matrix. Yep.
Yeah, and so on a technical level, it's about how well do I challenge people and support them, and both of those have to live in equilibrium, right? They can't be if you over-index on one versus the other, you're gonna have over-functioning and under-functioning. But just back to the idea of liberating, one thing I'm taking away from these conversations that I think people really lean into is our work as leaders is actually to liberate people. And I know some people probably hear that and they bristle like, this is just a job, John and John. Like, that's all this is. I'm trying to get someone to cook a better meal at the restaurant, or I'm trying to get someone to plan these events. But at the end of the day, I think if we think about like our goal is to liberate people wherever they exist in the world, whether that's in our family life with our kids and our spouses or with our nuclear family, we're going to be much more intentional about how we create conditions by which people like where they're at that moment, at work, at home. And so liberation as an idea is really heartening to me and something that I think the more we lean into these like really big words, like these really intense words like liberate, I contract with an organization that's goal is to reduce suffering. Look, we're not feeding poor kids and there are people who do that and we should do that too, but we can still do it in the ways that we support people at work, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that fits in with like a theme that I think Josh and I really wanted to continue with. And I think it's found its way into this, is just, where does story making and narrative continue to be a part of your leadership? And how do you tell those stories that give people hope, that paints the picture for them of where you're going as a team, what's even possible for them that they may have not realized is possible for them, right? Because you've done that in Susie and Dan and Andrew and Michael and Brandy and Griffin and Aaron Griffin and David Bolins have all, in one way or another, whether it's about intentional system design, whether it's about unpacking your own traumas, whether it's about daring to be wrong, talked about the importance of understanding yourself and painting pictures for others that help them to, I don't know, be liberated, and not that you're liberating them, but you're setting the conditions by which they can feel that. So a lot of thoughts packed into that from me and you. But it's been a blast. And I know we've got one more episode coming up. But Josh, I'll leave you with some final thoughts before I close this out here.
No, I just appreciate that reflection. Liberation is, I think that's a great closing word to think on and to leave you all to sit with, is how are you liberating others and how are you liberating yourself in order to do that? And so I'm going to let you close us out here, John.
So that's your homework.
Conversation. Yeah.
That's your homework. And we don't mean it even like tongue in cheek or like unserious, but how are you as a leader or a member of an organization thinking about the role you have in liberating others to be their best selves? And some of that work starts with you. So keep it up, friends. All right, we got one more episode. We're really excited for our next guest, a little bit on the brain and the neuroscience of leadership, which we're excited to talk about. So until next time, this has been Leadership Limbo, where we make space for the tension and tools for the journey. See you in the in-between.